An ugly eval from Pro Football Focus on LSU, Alabama. And where does Caden Durham disappear to? Let's talk about it. It's Locked on LSU.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen every day. We're free, available wherever you get podcasts, of course, on YouTube as well. So please subscribe. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button. And remember, the best way to help us grow is to comment below. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, where you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Brian Kelly met with reporters after the LSU-Alabama game. We'll delve into some of that, including what in the world they did for 2 weeks, and also what do they do now that their college football playoff hopes appear dashed. The coach wasn't super quick to get there, but we do this every week when Pro Football Focus releases their grades for the LSU game. So I spend the time to sift through them and tell you what the big takeaways were for me, and one of them is the absence generally of Caden Durham. Let's start with sort of the superlatives and the negatives. If you blend offense and defense, the highest rated players on LSU's team Saturday night, this may surprise you, were actually Emory Jones and Miles Frazier, the right side of your offensive line. Considering LSU's offense really struggled, I don't necessarily think you would have assumed that it would have been offensive linemen, but LSU ran the ball very well to the right side. They ran 9 times to the right for 72 yards. To the left, they ran 9 times for 26 yards. It probably won't surprise you that the lowest graded player was Paul Mabenga. The second lowest graded player offensively was Will Campbell. Campbell was fantastic, has been fantastic this year, but the penalties are what continue to ding him. Another penalty Saturday against Alabama. That's 8 penalties on the season. For perspective, Will Campbell had a total of 6 penalties in his first 2 seasons combined. That's 8 penalties now through 9 games this season, with still 3 to go. So a little bit of an explanation there. Defensively, Gio Paez rated out very well with a 70.5. And it sort of illustrates that LSU's interior run defense was pretty good, which that sort of felt like it was the case. The problem was whenever Jalen Milroe got a crease, your linebackers and your safeties didn't hold up. And that's illustrated here. When you look at the lowest graded players defensively for LSU, Major Burns, among the starters, Major Burns was the lowest graded at a 42.4 and a tackling grade of 29.1. I've explained this before, but if you look at the Pro Football Focus chart, it's sort of color coded. If you're awesome, it's like blue, and it goes from dark blue to lighter blue to dark green to lighter green to your yellows to your oranges, and the hotter it gets, the worse you are. A 29.1 is red. That's where Major Burns was. So very, very bad. His run defense grade was a 28.2. His tackling grade was a 29.1. We all talked a lot this week about needing Major Burns to have a big week in this game in particular, playing that star position. One of the things, I know we've not talked much about Harold Perkins since the injury, but this was one of those weeks where we talked about this is a game where you miss Harold, because of his athleticism, his ability to run sideline to sideline, and could potentially be used as a spy against Jalen Milroe. Not having Harold Perkins in this game proved to be a pretty big deal. And then we also mentioned not just Burns there at the bottom, but Greg Penn and Jordan Gilbert were the other two lowest rated defensive players. Gilbert with a 47.1 and Penn with a 46.8. The run defense grade for both was in the 30s. And that holds up. You expect your defensive line to clog the middle and eat up blocks, to free up your linebackers and your safeties to make plays. And when the linebacker doesn't make plays and the safety is the last line of defense, Jalen Milroe has 185 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. So it's interesting sometimes how Pro Football Focus grades actually map to what you think you're watching on the field on Saturday nights. And that certainly was the case here. Paul Mabenga, for what it's worth, was the lowest graded offensive player for LSU, and that's probably not a surprise given that it was his first start. He did allow a couple of pressures, and that's disappointing, but not altogether unexpected considering what you were up against in his first start. So that's kind of a look at the highs and the lows. But the one that I really want to focus on is Caden Durham. So Caden Durham graded out very well. He graded, if you're looking at Durham on the day, his grade was a 69.8. His pass blocking grade, by the way, was a 76.9. And his rushing grade was a 69.3. He was your third highest rated starter behind Jones and Miles Frazier. So why talk about Durham? This is the point I wanted to get to. LSU ran 70 plays in the ball game, if you include the special team snaps as well. Offensively, the Tigers ran 28 snaps in the first half. Remember, Alabama did really a masterful job of possessing the football. They had that 115-play drive that ate up 7 minutes off the clock. So LSU ran just 28 plays in the first half and then 38 plays in the second half. So that's a total of 64 snaps, 66 snaps offensively. Caden Durham played in 20 snaps. That is a massive problem. And I understand why the coaches take Caden Durham off the field in certain situations. The pass block grade here is an illustration. Against UCLA, his pass block grade was a 13.9. Against Arkansas, it was 18.5. Against A&M, it was 20.1. The coaches feel like Caden Durham is a liability on passing downs when you're asking him to stay in and protect. Whereas that's Josh Williams' forte. He's very good pass blocker. However, I don't know how you can justify at this point taking Caden Durham and his explosive ability off the field. In a game where you struggle to get going, not having Caden Durham on the field feels problematic. Just 20 snaps in this ballgame for Caden Durham, that's an issue. 20 of the 70 offensive snaps Caden Durham played. And if you look at it, opening possession, of course, he had the 45-yard run. LSU's second possession, Durham had a 7-yard carry on first down, a 2-yard carry on second down, 2-yard carry on third down. He converted for you right there. He had one more carry on that drive, and you would punt. The next drive, Caden Durham wasn't in the game. That was where Juwan Johnson went in the game in the second quarter. The next possession was the fumble, so it was just one play. The final possession of the first half, Josh Williams was in there in the final possession of the first half. So Caden Durham, when you were running your 2-minute offense, Caden Durham wasn't in the game. I think that's problematic. To start the second half, he carried the ball for 6 yards on the first play of the second half, and that was his only touch on that drive. It is worth mentioning, though, at the end of the first half, Caden Durham did catch the swing pass. So you didn't have him in any capacity except that final play to catch a swing pass. And then in the final possession of the third quarter, Durham was in there and had a couple of rushes. And then I didn't bother charting the fourth quarter because what does it really matter? The game was over and largely LSU had emptied the bench. If you're trying to find big explosive plays in your offense, it stands to reason your big explosive playmaker at running back should be on the field. So it feels like a bit of a catch-22 for this coaching staff. Do you leave Caden Durham on the field where he's a liability in pass protection so you become predictable by personnel? But then the flip side is also true. You put Josh Williams in where he is a good pass blocker, and then you become predictable by personnel because people know that he's staying in the pass block. That's why in the goal-to-go situation, you give Josh Williams a carry because everyone's expecting him just to stay in and block. It didn't work for you. He ended up losing a yard on that carry on LSU's first possession. Ultimately, I want the best player on the field, the most explosive, dynamic player on the field. That's Caden Durham. And when you look at his snap counts throughout the course of this season, especially since South Carolina, where he really emerged, 21 against UCLA, 20 against South Alabama, 41 snaps against Ole Miss, 40 snaps against Arkansas, 40 snaps against Texas A&M, 20 against Alabama. That's got to change for the final 3 games of the season. we'll certainly keep an eye on it as we move throughout these final 3 weeks and right here on Locked on LSU. Okay, when we come back, we will revisit some of what Brian Kelly had to say post-game after Alabama, including what in the world they did for 2 weeks and how they still couldn't stop a running quarterback and what they're playing for as they move throughout these final 3 weeks. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Brian Kelly met with reporters after the LSU loss to Alabama, and you can imagine the first question out the chute was effectively why you couldn't stop a running quarterback when you had 2 weeks to prepare.
If you're watching the game, you're like, what did these guys do for 2 weeks? Like, we have a scheme to stop the quarterback. We did not get that done. So I take responsibility for it. Blake is not going to hide from the responsibility, but we also have to put our players in the right position too to take advantage of what they're capable of doing. So we own it together, and we've got to get it fixed, certainly, because it's been a couple of weeks now, in 2 games. So I respect the inquiries and the questions, because we now go into these last 3 games with the need to win all 3 of these games and play better football in the month of November.
And in these 3 games that you're going to face, you're going to face 3 very different skill sets in the quarterbacks that we're going to talk about. And I want to get into that here in just a quick second, why it is so important that you get this fixed if it's even possible to get it fixed. But Brian Kelly was asked a follow-up about that and why they've struggled so much. Is it personnel? Is it scheme? Why they've struggled so much to defend the mobile quarterback?
We're not reinventing the wheel when it comes to defending the quarterback. There's only a couple of ways to defend him, and so we have to be able to get our players that we're not trading any of them. There's no waiver wire. We're not, bringing anybody up from, the demo squad. We've got to come up with the right answers on what works best for the guys that we have. And it hasn't worked very well these last couple of games. So we got to go back and start all over again and look at what's the best way to defend in certain situations with the players that we currently have, because they want to do it. They were ready. They were locked in. They were focused. They had the right mindset coming into this game.
If they were locked in, focused with the right mindset, then that's not an effort thing. Then you come down to, is it scheme or is it personnel? And this is where I really struggle, because I can buy that your personnel is a little deficient still. Remember, we can't lose sight of this. A year ago, you were statistically the worst defense in the history of the program. And it's not like you went and added a bunch of starters out of the portal. You added Gio Paez from Wisconsin. You added Jordan Gilbert from Texas A&M. That's really the extent of what you added. You didn't go add Caleb Downs. You didn't add Dominic Williams from TCU. You tried. So I look at this and I go, okay, well, that makes sense then. There's a personnel deficiency, and they're recruiting to address it. But then I look at how other teams have been able to limit Alabama running the football and Jalen Milroe. Vanderbilt did it. South Florida did it. Missouri did it. And Jalen Milroe had the two best games of his career. Understand me. The two best games of his career have come the last 2 years against LSU. 155 and 4 touchdowns a year ago, 185 and 4 touchdowns Saturday night against LSU. I don't believe that LSU has all Americans on the defensive side. I do believe that LSU's talent is on par with or better than Vanderbilt's, than Missouri's, than South Florida's. So why were those teams able to do what LSU couldn't? Well, then it points back to coaching. But there's Brian Kelly saying we're not reinventing the wheel. There's 2 ways to stop a mobile quarterback. But clearly LSU has been unable to do it. So I look and I say, man, your guys were ready. They were bought in. Your talent is as good or better than other teams that have stopped Jalen Milroe from running the football. And in consecutive years with 2 different defensive coordinators, you weren't able to do it. How in the world do you look at anything other than your preparation to stop it? Listen, when you faced Lenora Sellers earlier in the season, I could understand that. That was week 3. This was a team that was still figuring itself out. I mean, you still had Deshaun Spears starting at safety at that point. You were still figuring out what you were. That was before Harold Perkins got injured. You were figuring out what you were defensively. And then as the season went along, you did well against Ethan Garbers from UCLA, who's a mobile quarterback. You did a fantastic job up in Fayetteville against Taylon Green. And I could have bought the Marcel Reed argument because it was a sudden change and you weren't prepared for it. And then that's why you struggled. But now as the sample size grows and you struggle again against Milroe and it's back-to-back weeks that's happened, you could look back at your struggles with Sellers and it's more to say you really don't know what to do here to defend a mobile quarterback. And that's concerning because when you look at what's ahead, this week you're going to face most likely Aiden Warner from Florida. Now, Aiden Warner, this past week, in Florida's game against Texas, ran just 3 times for -7 yards. Of course, these are not sack adjusted. But and we don't know if DJ Lagway is going to be healthy enough to play. That's the 5-star number 1 quarterback freshman who's been dealing with a hamstring injury and went out of the game against Georgia 2 weeks ago. So we'll see if he's able to go against LSU. But even if Lagway does go, Lagway's best game running the ball was against Kentucky. He ran 9 times for 46 yards. He hasn't been, and by the way, it's the most carries he's had as well. Other than that, the most carries he's had was against Tennessee and Samford. Samford, he ran 5 times for 16 yards. So Lagway hasn't been a real big running threat, and neither is Aiden Warner, which is a little surprising because we know that the style of offense that Billy Napier wants to run is he does want that dual threat component of his quarterback. But after that, it's Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt. And Pavia on the season has run 159 times for 628 and 5 touchdowns. That's 4 yards a carry. And keep in mind that it's not sack adjusted. So actually, he has more rushing yards and a higher yards per carry clip because the NCAA college football stats are stupid and they factor in sacks into a quarterback's rushing total. So actually his numbers are better than that. And then in the final week, you're going to face Jackson Arnold from Oklahoma, who's run 108 times for 238 yards and 3 touchdowns. Again, not sack adjusted. So his numbers are better than that as well. You have a quarterback that's not going to run this week in Aiden Warner, a quarterback in 2 weeks in Diego Pavia, who is going to run and is really good. And then Jackson Arnold in 3 weeks, who is capable, but it's not the core of what he does. So it's almost like, like Goldilocks and the 3 Bears, the one that's too hot, the porridge that's too hot, too cold, and the one that's just right. Well, Pavia is great. Warner doesn't do it at all. Arnold somewhere in the middle. You're going to face 3 very different challenges over the next 3 weeks. Brian Kelly says they're committed to figuring out. You better. Or you're going to get saddled with another loss along the way. And a disappointing season will become a gigantic letdown of a season and have everyone wondering about the future of this program. Okay, speaking of the future, let's look at the next 3 weeks. Brian Kelly did also address LSU standing in the college football playoff. We'll let you hear what he said next. Locked on LSU, your team every day. Love telling you about our friends over at Game Time. Y'all, check out Game Time if you haven't done it yet. Download the Game Time app. It's amazing whenever you're trying to get to a sporting events, whenever you can use Game Time and the Game Time picks in particular. You can filter out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You got to download the Game Time app if you haven't done it yet. There's a great super deal and how amazing that is, and other tiers of deals as well when you use Game Time picks. So use that feature there at Game Time. You can customize your spot as well. The app will surprise you at times, so get on by and check out those curated deals that makes it easier to find the best price on great seats. The seat views before you buy that I always talk about, and I love the all-in pricing. The all-in pricing lets you show the total up front. You got to turn that feature on. You have to turn that feature on, but when you toggle it, it'll show you the full total up front before you get to checkout, so there are no surprises. If you are thinking about attending an event, whether it's music or sports or comedy or theater, you got to download the Game Time app. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem with the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. The biggest disappointment, of course, of LSU losing to Alabama is that LSU now has their third loss on the season. The lingering disappointment of that opening loss to Southern Cal, which is now a 5-loss team, just continues to follow you and linger all throughout the season. And it's so surprising because how quickly things can turn. This was a 6-1 football team with a double-digit lead on the road against Texas A&M. I mean, think about how quickly the entire perception has changed. You lost to USC. You'd won 6 straight, including a win over Ole Miss, following that up with a total obliteration of Arkansas in Fayetteville when they were coming off a bye. And then you had to go on the road to Texas A&M, and you were in complete control of that game in a battle of teams in the top 10 that were the only undefeated teams left in conference play. And in the midway through the third quarter, you had a double-digit lead. And since then, everything has fallen apart. You allow A&M to score in 5 straight possessions. You lose that game by double digits, and then you get blown out at home by Alabama. And now you're looking at what left is there to play for. You're a 3-loss team. You have 2 losses in conference play. And as I did mention on the previous episode, if you were here for our recap of the Alabama game, I did lay out a scenario. Again, I want to be very clear. This is so massively improbable. But remember, for LSU, it is still just a second conference loss. So there is theoretically a path to the SEC championship game as a 2-loss team. You need Auburn to beat Bama. You need Georgia to beat Tennessee. You'd love it if A&M beat Texas. You'd love it if Mississippi State beat Ole Miss. So there's a path. It's, again, very unlikely and improbable, but there is a path to Atlanta. And Brian Kelly was asked after the game what he tells his team now that for all intents and purposes, it appears like the college football playoff is off the table.
Yeah, I think everybody asked the same question. We really, look, they're disappointed. We're disappointed in the way we performed. We're not going, these guys are not like, hey, we're out of the playoffs. That's not what they're disappointed, and I'm disappointed that we didn't live up to the standards of LSU football. That affects us more than the damn playoffs. We're disappointed. When you put on the jersey for LSU, there's a standard of football that those 3 letters on your jersey, it's a prerequisite. And we didn't live up to that. That's the disappointment.
There is truth to that. However, when you walk in the LSU team room at Football Ops, and this is where Brian Kelly has his weekly Monday press conference and his Thursday media availability, so the media is in that room very often. When you walk in the door, immediately on the left, the giant wall on the left has LSU's full schedule, every game, the date, and the SEC championship game date, the college football playoff dates, the national championship date. So it's a bit disingenuous to say that they don't care about the playoff. And I don't mean to say he's saying they don't care about the playoff, but in that moment, immediate postgame, maybe he's thinking about how poorly they played. But you do have to recalibrate at this point. You don't control anything at this point. If you're going to get to the playoff, you need an awful lot of help, and it's still unlikely. And I do wonder at this point how much, like, this will be very telling. Now that you've lost this game, how much buy-in do you have the rest of the way? Do you have opt-outs the rest of the way? I think a year ago, we saw LSU lose the game to Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And at that point, that gave them their third loss. And in a 4-team playoff, the second loss really was an eliminator. But that was your third loss when you lost to Alabama. But what you still had on the line, let me be clear, you didn't have Jaden's Heisman on the line at that point. As odd as it is to say it, Jaden's odds came off the board at that point when you lost to Alabama. So you lost any hope of the playoff, any hope of getting back to Atlanta for the SEC championship. Jaden's Heisman odds were gone. And the next week you played Florida in Baton Rouge and you won 52-35. Now that was Jaden Daniels putting on his red cape and playing Superman. And the defense was atrocious, but Jaden Daniels was just awesome. But then you also had the Georgia State game. So you had a layup before you played Texas A&M. And you got down against A&M, but you rallied and won. You did, after you lost to Alabama, win your next 3. And that's something that I think as you look at here is maybe a roadmap to follow for the remainder of this season. Can LSU be motivated enough to go out, beat Florida in Gainesville, come home and beat Vanderbilt and Oklahoma, get to 9-3 like you've been the last 2 seasons, and find yourself hopefully in a nice bowl game with a chance to get to 10 and have some building blocks for next year with some momentum. Maybe we all just hope that the odds and the breaks fall LSU's way, unlikely as it is, but the thing you have to do is go win your next 3, and it starts this week against Florida. So we'll talk plenty about that as the week goes along. Hey, one other quick note before we get out of here about the LSU baseball and LSU basketball played on Sunday. The baseball team split a pair of split an exhibition in Lafayette against ULL, and the basketball team played Alabama State. Alabama State is a good team from the SWAC, and that was a competitive ball game. Alabama State led 32-26 at the half, and just under 8 minutes to play in the ball game, LSU kind of kicked it into high gear and ended up outscoring Alabama State in the second half 48-29, and the Tigers would notch a double-digit win 74-61. By the way, also, Matt McMahon has returned to the suit game. He's no longer wearing like warm-ups on the sideline. He's wearing a suit on the bench, which I kind of dig. Cam Carter and Jordan Sears, a couple of transfers, scored 18 second-half points each, and LSU had a 34-11 second-half run. They erased that double-digit deficit and beat Alabama State. So Carter's the Kansas State transfer. He was hot from 3 with 4 of 5. Jai Bailey at 15 and 7 rebounds for LSU. He's the Richmond transfer. So you're going to get to know some of these guys and their names as you move throughout the season. But a nice start with a blowout win over ULM, and then a nice win against Alabama State. That's an Alabama State team that, again, they're from the SWAC, and that's not one that's necessarily going to blow you away. But that is an Alabama State team that, when you're just looking at the net ranking, is going to win a lot of games. For example, last year, Alabama State finished they won 13 games, over 13 and 19, but most of that was chalked up in their pre-conference when you load up your pre-conference with really good teams. So a good challenge for LSU, not a great team with Alabama State, but a good challenge with a good SWAC team coming in. Tigers now are 2-0 on the season, and we'll see them back on the floor the next time in 4 days when they'll play at Kansas State on the 14th. So we'll, of course, be following it here. Okay, that'll do it for us here on today's episode of Locked On LSU. Now go check out Locked On SEC. Our guy Chris Gordy has got you covered. You can find Locked On SEC on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. All right, if you're on podcast, please subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video, and let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.